Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this afternoon's administrative session. Today's session is Building Healthy Communities, Exploring Place as a Source of Health. Today's presenters is Dr. Emma Pillsworth. Emma is a fourth-year resident in Public Health and Preventive Medicine at NOSM University, and she has with her Dr. Lyle Pacey. Lyle is a second-year resident in Public Health and Preventive Medicine at NOSM University. And then enjoy the presentation, and you're good to go, Emma.
All right. So actually, I'm gonna get things started. So the place I'm in right now has pretty good Wi-Fi, but kind of it can be a little bit spotty. So I'm actually gonna turn off my video. And so thanks so much for inviting us to speak today. We're going to be giving a talk about how the place that we live, work, play, and grow in can have a huge impact on our health and well-being. So we're going to be spending a while discussing the public health perspectives on health and the role of our field in health, as well as some of the more specific details on what can contribute to a healthy built environment. Next slide, please. So I'm Lyle Pacey. I'm a second-year resident in public health at the Northern Ontario School of Medicine, or NOSM, and I'll be completing my family medicine training in June. I'm really new to the area. Well, no, I've been here for about a year and a half, but I grew up and worked in Saskatchewan for most of my life. I've lived in Thunder Bay for about a year and a half now, and starting to figure the place out a little bit. Sorry I couldn't be there in person today, though. I actually just 2 days ago I moved to Moose Factory. I'm going to be here for a couple months on a clinical rotation. So both Thunder Bay and Moose Factories are great places for and both have great aspects about them. Again, let me know if my connection doesn't stay stable and if you can't hear me at any point. And my senior colleague presenting with me today is Dr. Emma Pillsworth. So she's actually been working in public health for a bit longer than I have. She completed a Master of Public Health in Kingston, and then she worked as a health promoter after that. And later on, she completed her medical school in Calgary and then her family medicine training program in Northwestern Ontario. So, and as the person who introduced me said, she's now in her fourth year of the program, and she's based in Sudbury right now. Next slide, please. And before we get into the meat and potatoes of the presentation, we want to pause to acknowledge that the place that Dr. Pillsworth and I learn and work are on the homeland of First Nation and Métis people in Canada. So I am not an Indigenous person. My recent ancestors settled in Western Canada, and this has given me a spectacular opportunity to grow and live here. But while I was growing up, it was really easy for me to take for granted the land and its first inhabitants. So the places I grew up, studied, and worked were across many of the treaty territories. But really, the number or name of the treaty really oversimplifies it, especially in a field like the one that Emma and I work in public health. Many of us work for governments at different levels or government agencies at different levels. And these are the same governments who represent the Crown, the same Crown and state that took part in signing the treaties. But for today, we are grateful for the opportunity to share information with you, but both of us continue to learn while we study and work on the land, and in doing so, we give our respect to its first inhabitants. Next slide, please. So we're going to start off with a little background. I'm going to talk about health, and specifically health from a public health perspective, and really what that means. And then we're going to start moving more narrow towards the role of the social aspects of health, including the role of the places that we live, the physical place where we live, work, and play. Often, when we talk about healthcare and health, we get really focused on things like having a family doctor, having beds in a hospital, or especially over the last few years in public health. I think most people think of public health as just working with infectious disease spreading in the community. And with that, we get really focused on things like not being sick or not having a disorder of some kind. And don't get me wrong, these are really important things to me and really important things for the health sector to keep in mind. But if we only focus on these physical things, we only focus on thinking about health in that way, we miss a lot of different aspects of our health. A proper holistic view really should consider physical health, sure, but also mental, emotional, and spiritual health. Next slide, please. In public health, we spend a lot of time thinking about what are called the determinants of health. Now, these are, a broad variety of things. They're all the things in different aspects of our life that influence our health. So it can be part of our personal life, the social environment that we live in, as well as the economic situation we're in and the environment that we're exposed to. Now, these are factors that we're exposed to often before we're born, in our childhood, and throughout the courses of our lives. And these are things that have a major role to play in how healthy we can be, as well as they can influence how healthy we might not be able to be. So the list here on the screen, it's a common one we use in Canada. We use it at the federal level. Some of them are way more concrete than others, such as income, the physical environment, and healthy behaviors. But some of them are a little more abstract. Things like social status, your childhood experiences, culture, and race or racism. So this list, of course, doesn't include everything or all the details, and regardless, the details can vary a lot between communities or even between individuals. And then going back to the what I talked about on the last slide, a lot of these things in this list are things we don't, when we talk about doctors, nurses, and other health workers, they traditionally don't work with things like this. That's why a public health perspective is different, in that it looks at all of these areas and recognizes that creating a healthy population depends on not just fixing health problems after they happen, but helping to prevent health problems by creating a healthy world for us to live and grow in. Next slide, please. So, and we can narrow the idea of determinants of health down even more into what's called the social determinants of health. And these have to do with the social context of where we're born, grow, work, live, age, and some of the big forces that move society. So, the big forces can be things like economics, and then a little bit closer to us are things like education access, as well as the quality of that education and what's included in it, healthcare, the quality and accessibility of that healthcare, the social and community context, and this is finally where we get to where you guys come in, are the neighborhoods and built environments where it all happens. Next slide, please. And as I've alluded to already, the determinants of health that affect us, it really varies with who we're talking to. So they can and should be customized to the population that we're talking about wherever possible. So, for example, we have a diagram here that's used by the First Nations Health Authority in BC, which in this case, more to the outside of it, they examine those huge society spanning factors like economics, environment, social and cultural forces that kind of act inward towards the individual. And then as we get closer to the community and the individual, we have the individual nations, the communities, families, and the land. And as we get more to the actions of the individual, we have responsibilities, wisdom, and connections with others in the community. And at its core, what we talked about a few slides ago is the whole health of the individual, the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health. So the work that you guys do has a place just as important in any of these models, and it allows us to examine housing, neighborhoods, and other parts of the built environment in First Nations communities as well. So, of course, this is one model. It's from a BC health authority, and it's not going to fit every community, even in BC, let alone here. But making the effort to understand the individual group that you're working with helps you target that group's needs. Next slide, please. And this slide has an even more focused perspective. So really focusing on this one focuses on one different aspect of health, on mental health and mental well-being. So this diagram and this model is from a slightly closer neighbor in Ontario, from the Thunderbird Partnership Foundation, based in Bothwell, Ontario. And we'll have a few more specific examples later on, but this framework reminds us that housing, safe, reliable, comfortable homes, has a significant role to play in helping people to grow and be well. And if we're not well for any reason, it gives us a place to recover. Next slide, please. And one last perspective on health is especially with the Indigenous peoples in Canada, it can be helpful for us to look at social determinants over the course of history. So from the distant past to what's being experienced today, or socially or institutionally separate from us and then closer to us. So over history, that could be whether over the course of history and the colonization of Indigenous lands and peoples, over the development of services and institutions in Canada's history, and the relationships these institutions had with Indigenous peoples, or certainly as you get closer in time, you have the generational history of communities and families, as well as the wisdom and suffering experienced by families and communities. But of course, if we're looking more right here, right now in modern times, there are factors that aren't specific to the individual person, things like the world economy or racism or the treaties that they're not specific to the individual person, but they do impact the individual person. Things that are very important to us individually, but also impact whole communities, are things like healthcare services, education, and culture. And then right up against the person is direct things that affect you and really the everyday aspects of the individual, having money, having a place to live, and having secure access to food. Next slide, please. And so why are all these things important? We talked about what the determinants of health mean and narrowed it down to social determinants and different aspects of health. When the effects of social determinants of health add up over a life of an individual, a generation, or even centuries of a people's existence, we see the effects start to pan out. Though the outcomes can be positive or negative, in healthcare, we, for better or worse, tend to focus on negative outcomes because we want to learn how to prevent them. We can use diabetes as a pretty concrete example that really disproportionately affects Indigenous persons in Canada. But ultimately, this quite concrete health problem can be the result of historical efforts and policies of governments and organizations in Canada, as well as institutions and social circumstances experienced today. And this all results in statistics like this: rates of diabetes that are way higher than in the non-Indigenous population. Next slide, please. So moving on from the determinants of health, that tells you a little bit about how public health thinks and how public health thinks about the cause of illness. What public health, capital P, public health agencies, what they are is they're organizations, they're organized efforts of society that use programs and policies to try to promote health over the course of people's lives. So, next slide, please. But what we do, as I had mentioned before, a lot of the things that we do aren't traditionally things that healthcare workers do. And what we do depends on not only what, doctors, nurses, scientists, statisticians, and such do, but we also depend a lot on the other sectors of society as well, such as yourselves. So, today, I pointed out the importance of housing and safe, comfortable living environment. The people responsible for creating and maintaining housing and other living spaces do have a crucial role to play in supporting the well-being of the people who live there. Next slide, please. And with that, so kind of giving you that introduction to how our discipline thinks, I'm going to hand things over to Dr. Pillsworth, who's going to be talking a little bit about the aspects of a healthy built environment, the places we live, work, and play. Thank you.
Thanks, Lyle, and so nice to virtually meet all of you. I am also so sorry that I am not able to be there in person, but I'm very, very grateful to have been invited to chat with all of you today, and I hope that some of the information that Lyle and I share will be useful in helping to think about things moving forwards. I do want to just mention that, I too am a non-Indigenous settler heritage individual, and, I'm still on my learning journey and always learning more. So, I hope to be able to share a little bit of the knowledge that I have gained through my public health residency to date, but certainly recognize that there's always more to learn and always eager to do so. So as Lyle has kindly introduced for us, you see some of those, underlying factors and how important the places, spaces that we live, work, and play can be in influencing health. And when we talk about that, really what we're talking about is a built-in social environment. And so in the next few slides, what I'm hoping to do is kind of describe, what a built-in social environment is. You can see on this slide refers to the human-made or modified physical surroundings in which people live, work, and play, and kind of how we can think about, in the housing context, all the things that go into that healthy built environment, so that you might be able to take some concrete pieces away in terms of thinking of things that might help to make your communities that you're living in or serving, or both, as healthy as possible. So this is the question that, I'm hoping to help us answer in the next few minutes. So how can home and neighborhood or community design be used as a tool to improve mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual health? And before we do that, I do want to take a moment to recognize that the built environment can look very different depending on the population density and community context that we're working in. Additionally, the history of colonization has inequitably shaped the distribution of resources in communities between settlers and Indigenous peoples. We are going to present a framework for healthy built environment that was developed with more of an urban context in mind, but that I will try to adapt and speak to in more of Indigenous as well as rural and remote settings. And I will show at the end, there's a study that kind of helped to adapt this framework to Indigenous contexts as well. So I'll be drawing on that quite a bit, and I'll show you that as well. Additionally, before we look at the framework that I'm going to present, I do want to just take a moment to show this resource, and also to acknowledge that for First Nations on Reserve, it is especially important to recognize that colonization, both recent and present, has had a significant negative impact on the built environment and the health of Indigenous people. Studies show that a lack of autonomy and control over housing, coupled with the imposed Western-centric housing design, contribute to psychological stress on reserve. Colonization also jeopardizes local food systems on reserve and directly contributes to a loss of cultural practices and healthy active living for Indigenous people, all of which are incredibly important for health and well-being. I also want to acknowledge that the need for improved protections that ensure safe drinking water and wastewater management on reserves and overall improved infrastructure that foster a healthy built environment are super important when we're talking about this, built in social environment context. The document on the right of the screen here does show a resource that links to key elements of the built-in environment, specifically on reserve, including housing, water and wastewater management, food security, active living, and transportation. So that's a nice resource to reflect back on if you are working in more of a remote First Nations or reserve community. So without further ado, this is the framework that we wanted to be able to share with you today. So this is a framework for a healthy built environment. It was developed in BC, but is used quite widely in Canada. As I've already acknowledged, it was designed with more of an urban setting in mind, but I will try to build in that more Indigenous context as well. So there's 5 key elements that we're going to discuss in terms of what contributes to that healthy built-in social environment that we're talking about. So healthy neighborhood or community design is the first one that I want to bring up, and this is reflected in diverse communities where all people can live, work, play, connect, and access amenities. For Indigenous communities, this means self-determined communities that are adequately funded to provide people with adequate access to public services and amenities. And then more specifically, sometimes we talk about complete or compact neighborhoods or communities. So those are those that are linked to increased active travel and physical activity where people don't have to move too far to get to, the things they would need in their daily life. And this results in better social well-being, decreased stress, and decreased healthcare costs. When thinking about community design, some things that you can, think about or consider. One word you'll hear is mixed use planning, mixed land use planning. So this just means a mix of, having those commercial or retail businesses all in one location that's proximal to housing so that people can get around and access the things that they need. And that reduces the need for travel and makes things more pedestrian or walkable friendly, which is something that we always value in terms of active transportation or being able to use your feet or your other active means, as we'll discuss on the next slide. Another one is that we don't want things to be too far apart. So kind of what I just said, want things to be relatively close together. We want to make trails and pathways readily accessible within residential areas or, in a community to be able to move between some of the core areas in the community without necessarily having to, walk on roads or places that are shared potentially with vehicles. And then, limiting for more of the urban setting, limiting urban sprawl is also something that has been linked to positive health outcomes. Additionally, it may include creating centrally located areas for social engagement, such as cultural centers that are placed where people can gather and share stories, and making sure that those are, centrally located and accessible. The next key piece of a built environment that this framework highlights is transportation networks or transportation and mobility. So as we've already touched on, connected neighborhoods are linked to increased active travel or active transportation. And that's just something we usually say in public health to mean that people are, using their own bodies to be able to get from A to B. So whether or not that's walking or cycling or, other active means, those would all be forms of active transportation. And we know that those can result in better social well-being, decreased stress, and decreased healthcare costs. From the BC framework, which again is targeted a little bit more at urban communities, we see that those, with bike lanes can be beneficial. Decreased reliance on private vehicles for transportation can also make it safer for everyone, making it so people are more likely to choose active transportation means. For more remote communities, we also have to think about isolation as a barrier that impacts mobility and it can impact health as well. So when we're thinking about, good transportation networks, that might also mean having opportunities for more connectedness between communities, or, ensuring that when people are ill, they can be transported if they need to be, but ideally making it so they don't have to be transported where possible. The other one is needing to think about safe, appropriate, and accessible movement across the landscape to areas and resources and services that are safe, affordable, and support traditional activities. So, making sure that where the ice is thicker is clearly the community knows that, where there's safer areas to be able to travel, those sorts of pieces can also be important for healthy transportation networks or means for transportation. The third piece of a healthy built environment that we wanted to share with you today is natural environments. And so natural environment is one in which green spaces and natural elements are protected, incorporated into the built surroundings, and accessible to all people, including children, lower income residents, or people with chronic conditions and disabilities. Communities with more green spaces and urban greening have less air pollution and increases in cardiovascular and respiratory health, so heart and lung health. Importantly, Indigenous culture, identity, knowledge, and practices are intimately linked to the land, and the land has even been identified as a determinant of health for Indigenous people. Health of the land is thus directly related to health of the people, so healthy land, healthy people. And that makes protecting green spaces and being rooted in environmental sustainability particularly important in the Indigenous context, and certainly for all of us, because we know that the land, affects us all. The next fourth component of a healthy built environment that this framework brings forward is food systems. And a healthy food system is one that supports population health by maintaining equitable access to affordable, safe, nutritious, and culturally appropriate foods. Our food choices are shaped by the quality and affordability of our food systems. Healthy eating habits do significantly reduce the risk of chronic diseases such as high blood pressure, osteoporosis, and cancer. Food also goes beyond providing basic sustenance. I did a presentation with Dr. Joseph Leblanc, who I really value for any of you who know him, and he taught me good food is good medicine. So I really like that idea, and that it's not just food, it's medicine, it's healing, and being able to have local food systems that can support food sovereignty, which is the right of people to healthy, culturally appropriate food through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and for the right for people to define their own food and agricultural systems is incredibly important. So I think this is a really important component of a healthy built environment that we need to be thinking about. Finally, the last component of a healthy built environment is housing. So, we've kind of talked about other components of a built environment, and now we're getting to housing itself, but you can see how they're all so inextricably linked together. So safe and affordable housing is a basic need, absolutely. Healthy housing supports healthy living by protecting people from health hazards inside and near the home. It's a safe, affordable, and accessible to all. Providing mixed income housing developments, meaning that there's housing available for people regardless of what their income might be, and supporting affordable and sustainable housing programs has health and economic benefits. Lower housing costs are associated with an increase in disposable income, which makes it easier for individuals and families to afford non-housing related essentials. So that might be things like medication or nutritious foods. Individuals and families are also supported to stay in one place for a longer period of time when they have safe and affordable housing, which improves their social well-being and builds connections and an ability to stay in community. On reserves, Eurocentric housing designs and materials don't take into account the diversity of cultural activities and the climates in which First Nations people live. So this is an important consideration. We also know that on-reserve houses, especially in northern regions, often lack appropriate and effective heating and ventilation systems and are too small to accommodate the size and structure of some Indigenous families. So these are other considerations, as we think about sharing our wisdom in terms of housing and models of the future. Overcrowding combined with poor ventilation are also challenges, and we need to be able to prevent the growth of mold and mildew, which otherwise can lead to pulmonary diseases such as tuberculosis, pneumonia, bronchitis, and asthma. Studies also show that a lack of autonomy and control over housing, coupled with the imposed Western-centric models that we've talked about, do contribute to psychological stress. So just another way that we see that link directly between housing and health outcomes, both mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional. So I hope that that model is interesting and kind of provides some food for thought. Just to summarize, the overarching principles are listed here, but planning and design of communities, big or small, have a direct and positive influence on how people go about their daily lives with significant health implications. Oh, sorry, was there a question? I'd heard something. Nope. Okay. When building communities, there is a need to consider those 5 key elements that we've talked about, and making sure that we're adapting to local community context and tapping into all of the community's strengths. So this is a nice piece of work that was done by Pepper Pritty in 2018, who partnered with Opinawan Nepuan Cree Nation, or OPCN, to help adapt the BC framework we just went through to an Indigenous context. They did find in this work that kind of those 5 key categories that we just discussed did still have application to Indigenous peoples. They did, however, recommend a few adaptations, and those are shown in this diagram here. So importantly, considering social context was considered central, and that was added to the model and shown in the middle in orange. Around that social context, they built in 6 social priorities that were identified as being really important to being able to influence those pieces of the built environment that are shown in the turtle's fins and head around its body. So in orange, those 6 social priorities are policy, economics, traditional and ecological knowledge, decolonization, self-determination, and reconciliation. And so those pieces are, fundamental, or were considered fundamental by this group to be able to influence those built environment factors that we talked about. And then when we talk about those 5 core elements of the built environment, there were also some slight language changes that this author has recommended. So the first one, rather than neighborhood design, thinking about community design and infrastructure was the language that was preferred. The second one, transportation, just adding in that idea of mobility that we kind of alluded to. So transportation and mobility, thinking about, if there are more challenges with being able to get around not only within community, but in and out of community, those are things that we need to think about for a healthy built environment. The next one is green spaces, was adapted to natural environment and Mother Earth. So looking at that, slightly more holistic language, and really considering that, the people and land are so interconnected. Food systems was modified to food and medicine systems. So kind of in the spirit of, good food is good medicine, thinking about that those two are so linked. And then the 5th one, housing, thinking about housing and shelter. So shelter was added just to be inclusive of kind of those places and spaces where people are living. So with that, just a couple of more slides at this point, and then we will open it up for questions. But I wanted to be able to kind of take that framework that we just talked about, take all of those things that make a healthy built environment, and really just make sure that we've connected that to the health outcomes. So I've alluded to that throughout our discussion so far, but this diagram and the one on the next slide kind of help to summarize that. So there's some examples on that first box on the left of things that we can do to support a healthy built environment. So things like having, walkable areas or cultural spaces, public art, things that make people feel connected and have opportunities to come together. Those things support a supportive environment, healthy diets through healthy food systems and food sovereignty, as we talked about, physical activity, being from having that more interconnected design, and making sure that people can move between the places and spaces they need to in an easier manner to promote physical activity. And then physical activity, healthy diets, and supportive environments, we know are linked to reduced risk of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease, which are some of our, leading medical chronic conditions that we worry about as doctors and individuals. And then, as well, leading to overall that improved physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional wellness. So, there is a direct link between the places and spaces that we live, our communities, and then our health outcomes. And this is just another diagram that we liked that helped to show that same idea again. So again, looking at the pieces of the built environment on the left-hand side, and then building across to how those influence our daily behaviors or exposures, whether or not what we're eating, what we're doing, who we're socializing with, and then the air and the things that we're breathing, the traffic around us, the noise and other exposures. And then those influence our biologic or stress responses, and then ultimately can contribute to chronic disease if not, mitigated or managed as best we can through a healthy built environment. So I just want to take a moment to return to this slide that I had shown earlier, just to remember that, although communities that Indigenous people live in can look very different, the general principles that we've discussed today can apply and be adapted to local community context. And it's really important to have that adaptation, as we'll see on the following slide as well. So it's important for work to happen at the community level. Community members, leaders, and elders can identify community needs and shape a healthy built and social environment for their community. And in order to do that, it's helpful to kind of think about, what are the things that people in community do on their day-to-day basis? What are the things that are important to members of the community? Some examples are listed in the tiles on the right hand of this slide, but they might be different for certain communities. And when we think about a healthy and built environment, it's important to think about those factors and help to create the spaces that are going to be supportive and nurturing of those things that are priorities for community, and making sure that they're connected and proximal to the housing and places that people are living, working, and playing every day. So with that, I just wanted to end on this quote. So I liked this: ties to the land, water, family, community, and identity, as well as a holistic, interconnected view of health and well-being, are important components of Indigenous culture that can provide insight into healthy neighborhood design. So just, re-reflecting on that connectedness between the places we live, work, and play, and our health and well-being. So with that, I just want to end on a moment to reflect, and in the spirit of the conference, sharing our wisdom and shaping our future, I hope that some of the learning that we've done on our learning journey within our public health residency program has been helpful today, and in helping to think about, what makes a healthy built environment, what makes spaces that are beneficial for individuals and communities to live in. And with that, I will say a huge thank you Miigwech, merci. We are very, very grateful and humbled to be able to present to all of you today. We'll open it up if there are any questions or anything that people would like to ask. I think we have about 5 minutes. I'll stop sharing just so you can see us a little bit better as well.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Pacey and Dr. Pillsworth. Does anybody have any questions for any of these two presenters? Yeah, there seems to be no questions, and on behalf of the working group community, we'd like to thank you for presenting. We will be mailing you a speaker's gift, and you should be receiving it within a couple of weeks.
Oh, thank you so much. We really appreciate it and send all our best to all of you. Miigwech.